Okay, we are all set up for live stream. So Chair, I'll hand it over to you.
Aloha and good afternoon. My name is Phyllis Shimabukuro-Geyser. I'm the co-chair for the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Next item on the agenda is introductions, and I think I'll just acknowledge that we have Grace Simmons representing Department of Health today in our meeting. And ask Chelsea, do you want to introduce any of the legislators that are present?
Yes, of course. Today we have Representative Lowen with us. Welcome. Representative Wildberger. Representative Martin, welcome. And just making sure I didn't miss anybody here.
I see Representative Nakamura from Kauai.
Oh yeah, Representative Nakamura. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. And welcome to our HISC Council meeting. Next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the June 9th, 2021 meeting. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Okay, moved by Council Member Comerford. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second, thank you. Second by David Rodriguez. We're in discussion. Is there any comments from the public regarding the minutes before I ask council members?
No comments, and we do have one of our HISC support staff monitoring YouTube, and there's a little bit of delay, so we'll just kind of give it a few seconds to make sure no other comments come in through that YouTube channel before moving on.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're good. We can move forward.
Council members, any discussion, any corrections, comments? Okay, seeing none, I can see you all on the screen. So there's a motion to approve. All those approved, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. I see Comerford, David Rodriguez, and Grace Simmons, and chair votes approve. Okay, anyone opposed? Any abstentions?
Yeah, I'm going to abstain. Just because I wasn't at the last meeting, I'm not really sure, but if you need me for the vote, I could vote, but I'm filling in for Suzanne, so I think I'll just abstain.
Okay. Thank you, David.
Not that I have any noted objection.
Okay, so I'm going to have to say David Smith because we have two Davids present today.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so the minutes are approved. We'll move on to the submittal, which is requesting approval for a recommended budget for fiscal year 2022. So is Chelsea or Robert Hoff, are you both doing the presentation?
Yes, I'm going to do the presentation, and then Rob Hoff, who chaired our resources working group meeting on August 10th to create the recommended budget, is also here to answer any questions or comments that come up from members. But I can take it from here. Let me just get this in presentation mode. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, council members, and legislators, and of course our HISC staff that's been helping us coordinate for the FY22 budget. This is just a few reminders as we get started here. So this is for the public, just to know this is to approve our recommended fiscal year 22 HISC budget. Public, and that includes applicants, are able to view this meeting through the live stream. Let me just move forward here. Okay, so moving on to the submittal requesting approval of a recommended budget for fiscal year 2022. I do want to go over, I know we do this every year, but just an overview of our budget process, and then highlighting a few changes that happened for this fiscal year with our evaluations and the budgetary process. And then I'll move on to those recommended award amounts. So not much has changed with the overall process. It's a bit like climbing a mountain over the course of 4 to 5 months. We start with a call for proposals. That usually goes out around May. And then we have our members of the resources working group evaluate each of the applications individually. And that's what we did at the last meeting. Is now the resources working group is subject to sunshine law requirements. So we asked for approval at the last council meeting of the members of that resources working group. And I'll highlight those folks in a little bit, but with those sunshine law requirements, it just falls under any other rules that go on with a board or council meeting. The final application scores are entered into an overall spreadsheet, and I'll show you kind of how those scores are broken down in a couple of slides here. And then those applications are ranked from highest to lowest. And in that spreadsheet, there's a formula in there, and it takes the score, the recommended amount, and the total available funding to create a balanced budget. So it creates a recommended award amount for each of those proposals. And that becomes the starting point for our discussion at our resources working group meeting. That meeting took place, again, I said on August 10th, so a few weeks ago. And it's structured primarily as a discussion amongst the members of the resources working group, but we also encourage the applicants to attend, and we give them a Zoom link where they can, if questions come up or comments, they have the opportunity to address those. And then all others, we stream it through YouTube, just like this meeting. And then the approval process, that comes to what we're doing right now with the council approval of the recommended budget. These are the members of the resources working group. They are representatives from each of the HISC agencies. These folks we work with pretty closely. They're either chairs of our HISC CGAPs working groups, or we work with them on implementation of the biosecurity plan. And so each of these members of the resources working group were assigned a set of proposals to evaluate. A lot of them had to do with their expertise or the sector that they work in. And then they also had some more just kind of random ones put into their evaluation pot there. So going over the scoring, there's a total of 80 points, and where they can score the most points is by the priorities. We have 5 priorities, and they're in support of our biosecurity plan and also our new 5-year plan with the Hawaiian Invasive Species Council and coordinating group on alien pest species. And both of those are posted up on our website, and we encourage the applicants to review those while they're putting their proposals together. They also can get scoring for how their proposal impacts the different sectors, leverage funding, that also gets points, and if it's a multi-year project. And then if the proposal is part of a larger management or strategic plan, they can get points for that, but we didn't count that if it's a research project. Typically research projects don't fall into a strategic or management plan. And then here are the funding priorities, and council members that have been in these meetings before are probably really familiar with them because they pretty much come out of our HISC CGAP's 2025 joint strategy. So it deals with prevention, early detection, rapid response for new invasions, intra-island movement of invasive species, large-scale control of high-impact invasive species, improving Pacific regional biocontrol capacity, and engaged in supportive community. So the applicants had to show how their project relates to any of these priorities. And then the evaluation committee would score them based on that. So 5 priorities, 10 points each. And then looking at our funding requests over time. So this is always the challenge with these meetings, is the total requested is what you'll see with the gray bars. The orange is the total HISC funding that we get appropriated every year. The last 3 years, we've had 5.75 million, which has been wonderful. And then the blue represents what actually is available out for the projects to apply for. And this is just, I'll go over why that gets subtracted down, but it's overhead, it's our own HISC support budget. So there's a little bit less. But what I wanted to convey in this graph is just our total request is always significantly more compared to what we have available. So there is the struggle of trying to fund all the projects. So moving into this year, this is just a graph showing the amount requested. And you can see kind of on the right-hand side, these projects, these are our larger programmatic asks for the invasive species committees, Hawaii Ant Lab. And just to note, this looks like a big jump right here, but this is 2 programs. This is a combined proposal for the Maui Invasive Species Committee and the Molokai Invasive Species Committee. And getting into what I was just talking about, what we get appropriated from the legislature every year, the 5.75 million, and then we have a little bit less that goes out to the projects. So the total requested for fiscal year 22, around 9.1 million, our appropriation. And then we have a restriction, DOFA overhead. We also had a LNR 804 that we had to contribute some funding to. And then this is our HISC support budget right here. So this is salaries for myself, our weed risk assessment person, the 643 pest technician, and the Mamalu Poi Poi coordinator. And we also had to include the invasive species coordinator position in that, which is currently vacant. And so this is what's left over that goes out to our applicants for that resources working group. And I just included the chart from last year. It's pretty similar. There was a little bit more requested last year, but pretty much down the line, it was very similar, just with the exception of the HISC support budget, because we're taking on the cost of that invasive species coordinator was a little bit more. So this is what the resources working group had to work with for that meeting on August 10th. And this is what maybe is going to change up a little bit for this year's council meeting and approval of the budget. In the submittal this year are 2 budgets. One is the recommended award amounts that were determined at that August 10th meeting by the resources working group. A second recommended award amount was determined by HISC staff. So this is a little bit different than this year, and what we're asking for at this council meeting is approval of the recommended budget determined by HISC staff. And I'll get into why we're recommending it and go into some details with that. So at the end of the resources working group, there was a significant gap in funding to one of our critical programs compared to the previous year. And I'll show that table that really shows that gap clearly in just a second here. And this is due, we had some larger requests that we prioritized. One of them was the Hawaii Ant Lab, who is typically funded, gets a large amount of funding for their operational costs from Department of Agriculture. And just with the funding stream, that might not happen again for this coming FY22 year. And we wanted to prioritize that amount, funding them as much as we possibly could. Another project that we funded was one for two-line spittle bug. This has become a major issue on Hawaii Island And it's really raised the alarm that we need to do something quickly. And there was a proposal submitted for research and management on two-line spittle bug that we funded, and it was around 190K. So with those two asks combined, that created a larger gap in some of our critical programs. So what we were trying to do is address it after the resources working group. We pulled funding from our HISC support budget, and we also applied a 2.5% reduction to all the funded projects, with the exception of that critical project that I'm going to talk about in just a second, and our biocontrol work with the Forest Service, because during that resources working group meeting, they already took a pretty significant cut to their budgets. So this is what we're looking at. HISC always tracks the major priorities for funding. So that includes biocontrol, large-scale mosquito work, the Hawaii Ant Lab, and the Invasive Species Committee. So we like to track year by year what they get funded. And funding isn't always exactly the same for all these programs. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. But what we're dealing with is, with the Big Island Invasive Species Committee, a really significant gap in their budget. And this is just a major concern for HISC going forward. And that's why we wanted to try to do a reduction and take some of those additional funds and put them into the Big Island Invasive Species Committee budget, because that type of gap in their budget really is problematic for their staffing and also their current targets that they're working on. And you can see why we didn't take out a biocontrol or apply that 2.5% reduction to the biocontrol, is they're already getting a lot less than they received last year. Okay, so talking about how we're closing the gap. Again, I said we're moving some of the money from our HISC support budget out of that and into the available funds, which then is getting applied to Big Island Invasive Species Committee. And then we also recommend applying this 2.5% reduction to all the funded projects. And you can see, this is just an example of what it looks like. So we have our overall ranking, the proposal title, the total that they requested, and then what the resources working group recommended, and then what that 2.5% reduction looks like. So when you look at it applied across all these proposals, it doesn't seem like a significant amount, but what that equates to altogether in additional funds is around $86,000. And that's a huge addition to closing that gap on the Big Island Invasive Species Committee budget. So that's why you see the two recommended budgets in this year's submittal. And then just looking at that 2.5% reduction applied, and you can see here, it's already closed that gap by 100,000. It's still a big gap, and we're gonna work with Big Island Invasive Species Committee just to make sure if there's other projects or funding sources, we can help close that even more. And I mean, that goes for all of our invasive species committees. The Oahu Invasive Species Committee, they're also seeing a pretty significant gap in funding. And just because from year to year, I mean, we really want to prioritize these programs and them getting money relatively consistently across the years. But it doesn't always happen, unfortunately. And we want to continue to work with them to find other funding sources. So again, this is the totals for those critical programs and the HISC staff recommended amount. And then this column right here, this just shows what that difference is. So you can see that additional funding added to the BISC budget. And I know that was a lot, so I'll stop there before going into an overview of each of the proposals. I categorized those, so I'm not going to run through every single proposal, but I'll kind of highlight some of them and move through it that way.
Chelsea, could I?
I think we need a motion.
Oh, not yet, Chair.
Okay.
I was just gonna pause here and see if council members, legislators have any questions about those two recommended budgets or just the overall process.
Hey, Chelsea, can I just say something real quick?
Mhm.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. So it's a challenging year for budgets, as you can probably all imagine. And this year we had a bunch of our positions frozen, and one of those included the HISC manager position over at DOFA that administers this program. And so in order not to lose that position, have it eliminated altogether, we traded off the personnel costs for operating costs out of the HISC budget. So that's going to be an ongoing cost to our budget, but we thought it was worth it. It was like 1.1% of the overall budget, but it allows us to maintain, a position to manage the budget. So we'd like to go back to the legislature and request restoration of those funds if possible, but that was an additional hit that we took this year. And then adding on top of it, we still have 7% restrictions coming out of the executive side, and then we have overhead costs at the DOFA side. So altogether we're looking at some pretty substantial restrictions. Those restrictions also on the DOFA side or DLNR, they come out of both personnel and operating. Overall, our personnel costs are much higher, and so it all gets shifted over to operating, and so the overhead becomes somewhat higher on the operating side because we don't want to give up positions. So anyway, just a long story short, it is a pretty challenging year for funding, and hopefully we can get some support from the legislature because you can see the need and that they're starting to develop some shortfalls, and we really want to be able to stay on top of these the HISC priorities, especially because we think that biosecurity, early detection, rapid response is really cost effective versus trying to fight these things forever once they come in and get established. So super important program, want to keep it going, and any additional support we can get would be great. So thanks.
Is there any more to the presentation besides David Smith's comments?
Yes.
I have a comment, David Rogers, DOT. Chelsea, I was on the research working group a few years back, and I just remember it was an open process. Was BIS not present in the room? I mean, that's a pretty big gap, and normally you guys all fight for what you need. So I'm just curious, is there a concern with the BIS?
Yes, yeah, there definitely was a concern at the end of the resources working group meeting. And I mean, it's a really good question. And I think there's a number of factors. The one that I mentioned is, some of the funding being reallocated to like a new project and also to support the Hawaii Ant Lab. But HISC is also going through a transitional time. Like Dave mentioned, we don't have our invasive species coordinator position is vacant at the moment. Josh Atwood typically ran these resources working group meeting. And on top of that, they're also subject to sunshine law. So we were under a time constraint. So the meeting ran long, and we needed to take a vote near the end of the meeting, and it felt a little bit rushed at the end. And typically we spend time more time actually reviewing all the recommended award amounts before we have approval, but I don't think we were able to give it as much time as we had in the past. And so that led to just having that gap in the Big Island Invasive Species Committee budget. And I would say all the managers, you know, they always are able to, it is an open process, so they're able to vocalize their needs, or if they're getting recommended a certain amount of funding, what they would have to cut in their programs with that amount of funding versus something more. So they were definitely able to vocalize that, but I just think the time constraint and being subject to sunshine law and not having the same momentum we've had in years past caused that gap.
Okay, thank you.
And I can open it to Rob too, if you want to add anything to that, Rob.
No, I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up. It's a challenging meeting to have, and we were afraid that we were going to lose quorum. It was approaching 5 o'clock, and there were one of the members was on the mainland. It was late there, and somebody else's car was getting locked in the garage. So we really had to wind things up at that moment where we were, which was unfortunate.
Can I just follow up? Sorry, I'm just, maybe if you can just draw the bridge between why the sunshine requirements and the rushness of the meeting led to this, what seems like, you know, more underfunding of Big Island Invasive Species Council, which I guess, I mean, of course, I'm partial, but I always feel like is disproportionately underfunded already in past years. So how did that sunshine and rushness of meeting lead to that outcome? Doesn't seem that it's self-evident that that's what that outcome would be because of things being rushed or because of sunshine.
Yeah, and it's not, I would just clarify, it's not just the meeting being subject to sunshine law. It's funding new proposals and also trying to prioritize projects that are don't really have any other funding sources, like I mentioned earlier. But with the sunshine law requirements, it just means we have quorum. We have to have quorum to take the vote. And like Rob mentioned, with people, our members of our resources working group were starting to drop off as the meeting went over time. So we scheduled it as an 8-hour meeting, but it went a half an hour over. And so that was one of the reasons for that, but not the only reason.
But there must, sorry, I don't want to belabor it, but there must have been then a proposal on the table already that was being voted on that included these levels of funding, or there just wasn't time to make amendments to that proposal. Is that what it was? Or Robert, did you want to add anything?
There's a lot of negotiations that go on. One reason why we have these open meetings is we're able to ask applicants, you know, what how they'll be impacted by, you know, the reductions on the board from their previous, which is really helpful because, for instance, the Hawaii Ant Lab was saying they were going to, anything lower than what their main request was, they were going to have to furlough employees. So we were able to take that into consideration when balancing it against other projects. And because we were dealing with this shortfall, we were trying to come, you know, to a consensus where there was the least impact to projects across the board. And that was taking some time to sort through.
And I'll just add on, there was a difference there. This is maybe getting a little too specific, but some of the invasive species committee will lump their proposals in together, and that tends to score higher when they do it. Whereas some of them will piece apart their proposals, and that tends to give them a lower score and also a lower initial recommended award amount. So unfortunately, the Big Island Invasive Species Committee just started at lower award amounts at the beginning of the meeting because they weren't hitting as many of those priorities in those individual proposals.
Sure, thank you. I mean, it does seem like if there's some issue with understanding how to best work the process, that every committee should be able to have kind of equal footing in that, and the decisions, shouldn't be hinging on sort of how those kind of factors. So maybe it's a communication issue, but thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And we're definitely taking feedback from our members of our resources working group and the applicants on how we can approve the process in future years and make it, and for the most part, I feel like it's a very fair, very transparent process. But as we move into new leadership, there might be room to adjust that and make it efficient, and whoever takes on that invasive species coordinator position in the future.
Yeah, and can I say also, so this is kind of symptomatic too of not having an invasive species coordinator. And so that position's been open for some time, and there's bound to be hiccups. I mean, Chelsea's done an awesome job filling in, and carrying the ball while that position is vacant, but it's been vacant now for, I think it was frozen more than 18 months ago. So it's been pretty challenging. And I really got to give credit to the HISC staff who have been covering, but that's a kind of a crucial vacancy in the program. Bound to be hiccups here somewhere. But yeah, definitely, I think, there's always the interest, like Chelsea showed that slide with all the programs, and there's definitely that support, I believe, across the board for supporting those main programs. Those are kind of coming off the top, generally speaking. I think this year was we lost some continuity. The combination of, Josh, who had so much continuity with the program for so long, leaving, and then also having that position vacant, the combination was challenging.
Well, I will do what I can to try to see that position refunded, but I think I've said this in past years as well. Like I feel like one factor that should be considered maybe a little more heavily is just sort of an equal distribution of the funds between islands commensurate with the issues that each one is facing, as well as like the geographical size that each one has to cover.
Yeah, so noted. And then there's also, but then you got to also balance, like, do you want, it's like some island, it's like, for instance, on Hawaii Island, there's a bunch of things that are established and they've pretty much have given up on the chance to eradicate, like Myconia, little fire ant, coqui frog. Whereas on Oahu, those things are all incipient and we could potentially eradicate them. And what would be the environmental and economic impacts of having those kind of things? So, it's like a pretty complicated algorithm trying to figure all that out. But that's why we have a committee.
Yeah. I mean, some of those things, like I understand the issue of sort of giving up on things, and we're used to the tough job of having to explain that to our constituents dealing with these things. But for things like little fire ant, I mean, the funding has to stay there. People can't just live with them,
Yeah, and we do need to continue to address it in whatever way we can that's appropriate, on the landscape based on what the status is, and I don't like to say give up, because I don't like to ever give up on something, but you never know. And for instance, we're really pushing for a biocontrol facility over here, and so that might be something that we could that could help us, in the future. But some of these things have become sort of landscape scale issues. This is kind of a spiel I was going to get into later, but sometimes we end up continuing to chase these things even after they become more of a management issue than a really early detection, rapid response, chance of eradication kind of issue. And so I just want to keep our eye on the ball, that we keep our focus on those things that we can actually potentially eradicate. So anyway, that's just, when I was the Oahu branch manager, I'd always be harping on the OS gang, don't take your eye off the ball, Myconia, little fire ant, coqui, don't, everything else is, you can work on other things if you got time, but focus on those three. Those are the most important things. And so always trying to bring the focus back onto those really, most critical species issues. And those issues are going to vary island by island and across the state. We have rapid ohia death, in the mix now too, which is a statewide and a landscape scale kind of thing. So, and yet, the research that we're putting into rapid ohia death is we're finding out some great things about how to actually, what's causing it, how to actually help mitigate it. So, you know, it's a really important effort. So there's just a lot going on. It's a really complicated algorithm, and that's why it's nice to have such a diverse group, you know, both at the working group level and then at this HISC committee level to be able to try to figure all that out.
Great, thank you. And I mean, I appreciate the work that you all have done, and it's not an easy job, so it's appreciated.
Yeah, it's a great program. I give a lot of, give a real shout out to all the folks that are managing it, because it is very complicated and very important work.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Thank you, Rep. Lowen, for your concerns. You know, we do understand that you've been great supporter of Hawaii Ant Lab, and you know, CAS has been working really hard on the Big Island to do a lot of education outreach along with CGAPs to get people to better manage LFA on their private lands. So, you know, the work on the education outreach part is not forgotten. If there are no questions or comments from the council members or the public, then do you want to provide the recommendations, Chelsea and Rob?
Yes, yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, council and legislative members, for the discussion and questions. And we'll probably engage you a little bit later on just to get some feedback on how to improve next year's funding process. If you have any comments, we'd really appreciate them.
Pardon the interruption, Chelsea. We have a request for one public comment.
Okay, we have public comments at the end of the agenda.
Got it.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chuck. Okay, with that, now it's time for a lot of spreadsheets. So I will move on and go through what was funded and what wasn't. So we'll start with what was not funded. This happens every year, where our lowest scoring proposals get recommended no funding, just because we're on such a tight budget. And there's also projects in here that have scalability requirements, which means if they didn't get 50% of their total requested funding, that the project wouldn't be viable anymore. So that's where we really start our discussion with the resources working group, is with those projects that scored very low and also have scalability issues that we're not able to meet at their requested amount. Also on here are projects that voluntarily withdrew their proposals. Like the very first one for the Hawaii Ant Lab. This is specific for little fire ant response on Oahu. The applicant said that if he got his larger request at a higher amount, that he would be able to withdraw that proposal and still be able to do that. So the Oahu response is included in the Hawaii Ant Lab's larger request that I'll show on the next slide. A lot of these projects that don't get funding, they just score low in the priorities because they're either species specific or it's just a very specific research project, and it doesn't hit a lot of those overall priorities that I outlined earlier in the slide. But that doesn't mean that these projects aren't without merit. And even during the conversations at the resources working group, a lot of our members say, hey, this is an important project and maybe I can help you find some funding for that. So this is included in the submittal. I won't go line by line on each of these, but I'll leave it up there as I'm talking, just so if council or legislative members have any questions about any of these proposals, please, I'll just kind of leave some space at the end of each slide for those comments or questions. Okay, I'm gonna move forward. So this category, I put it as programmatic awards. These are our larger programs that ask for operational costs, and they usually work on a number of things of research, management. So they do a lot of stuff, and they usually score relatively high. So you can see that over here, the overall ranking. These are all the top 15 ranking proposals because they hit a lot of those priorities, like the coordinating group on alien pest species, Hawaii Ant Lab. So you can see the Hawaii Ant Lab, we pretty much said, hey, we're gonna just fund your entire proposal, which we don't usually do, but just with, you know, foreseeing budget constraints for that program in the future, we wanted to make sure that was a priority. But again, what we're looking at is that 2.5% reduction. And this applicant did see this amount, and so it's a little bit less than that other one, but this is the column that we're asking the council to approve. But I wanted to make sure to present both those budgets. So you can see the different proposals for the invasive species committees. That includes a lot of their outreach work and also, you know, general control of their target species. Okay. Any questions?
Chelsea, David Rodriguez. I just want to thank the Resource Working Group and the BIS, I mean, not the BIS, but the Mamala Poi Poi for actually seeking general funds for their program and for the recommended funding. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, David. So where did I don't have it in there. But yeah, Mamala Poi Poi, the coordinator, applied for Hawaii Invasive Species Committee Council funds this year because they are approaching their last year of funding. And thank you to Department of Transportation for funding that over the course of 5 years. So we are looking for other sources of funding to continue that because it would free up more of the HISC funds to go to other projects in the future. But right now it is a priority that we want to continue on. So moving on to the next category, I just put these together. It's biocontrol research and weed management. So a lot of these projects are proposed by the biocontrol researcher at the Forest Service. And these are continuing research projects for finding natural enemies for some of those worst widespread pests like Albizia, mellostomes, and rubus species. And then also some general weed control projects. Big Island Invasive Species Committee put in a proposal for eradication of devilweed on Hawaii Island, which was just a recent detection over this year. Really bad weed. And also the Kolau Mountains Watershed Partnership is trying to put together, or has already started, an Albizia community control team to work on controlling Albizia at a regional level and also in some of those Mauka watershed areas. So again, just the total requested, what the resources working group recommended, and then the HISC support staff recommendation with that 2.5% reduction. And you can see for those biocontrol proposals, those numbers stayed the same just because that applicant during the resources working group took quite a significant voluntary cut to his award amounts. Great, next category, aquatics. This year was really great because we actually had representation from aquatics with our members of our resources working group being from the Division of Aquatic Resources. We had Kim Fuller and Natalie Dunn. So I think that just added some balance to our evaluations. We never get a ton of aquatic proposals, but these are some of them. The funding the Hawaii Ballast Water and Biofouling Coordinator over at Division of Aquatic Resources. And we've been funding this for the past few years. And then we've been funding some of the University of Hawaii research on invasive algae. The next category is, I just put it as rapid ohia death. And I would just note that a lot of the invasive species committees, that they didn't put together a separate rapid ohia death proposal. It's like Oahu Invasive Species Committee and Maui Invasive Species Committee, they all incorporated that into their larger programmatic asks. But of course, Kauai and Big Island are in a different state with rapid ohia death, so they put together separate proposals on that. And that's just what this is showing. And also the rod outreach specialist on Hawaii Island, that's part of the University of Hawaii Extension Unit. There was a request for that position. Any questions at this point? Okay, moving on. And this is our research proposals. So quite a few of them. I'll just highlight a few of them. Field trials for mongoose toxicant from the USDA. And I'll mention that we did have testimony support submitted in support of funding this project. I sent that to council members and legislative members earlier today. I also wanted to highlight that proposal for two-line spittle bug research and management. So for a new proposal, for HISC, this is a significant amount. A lot of times new proposals will either fund at a small amount or not at all. So this was kind of a big addition to our budget, but I mean, it just showed how critical the need was. It scored relatively high, and the discussion during the resources working group was that this was a need. Also some economic analysis on little fire ant eradication on Maui, animal disease diagnostics in support for shrimp pathogens. So it's kind of a mixed bag of different research. We have mosquitoes, which are one of those projects that we track from year to year. And so these are supporting projects to help move that large scale mosquito control forward. We had proposals from Department of Land and Natural Resources, the University of Hawaii, and the Department of Health. And then the last proposal that didn't really fit into any of my categories is just ungulates. We don't typically get a lot of proposals for ungulate control. That usually goes with the watershed partnership projects grant system. But we did have one from the Kolau Mountains Watershed Partnership for feral goat control on East Oahu. So I will leave it for questions before going into the recommendation.
I don't really have a question per se, but I mean, this is kind of where I was going to talk about, my interest in continuing to focus on the most important things and whether our current process is something that vets that and makes, brings the most important issues up to the top. But, I trust that all the, there's a bunch of good people on those working group committees. And so I trust that they did a good job of that. But one thing that's kind of close to my operations is the mosquito piece. So there's like 4 different mosquito, as an example, 4 different mosquito proposals. And we kind of have a clearinghouse right now for the called Birds Not Mosquitoes, a kind of a clearinghouse for doing a lot of the mosquito evaluation and research, importation and deployment. And, we literally have 3 species of endangered forest birds that could be extinct in the next 2 years. And certainly within the next, 4, and we're looking at we're trying to get these things out on the ground in 2 to 3 years. So it's like really critical. There's things that could literally go extinct before we get the actual tool applied, even initially. And so I would like to ask that, with this mosquito money, since I see like it says like birds, not mosquitoes, if the committee could approve that, like the birds, not mosquitoes group could take a look at the overall approach with the mosquito thing and help to work with the HISC staff and whatnot in deploying the funding to make sure it's put where we can be most effective and the most important things for mosquitoes, as there's this constantly shifting timeline of as things move forward, kind of on the Gantt chart of moving the whole mosquito effort forward. So research, planning, permitting and everything. And so if compliance, so, if we could have some flexibility in how those monies were deployed, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I think those are great notes for next year's process to figure out and work with those groups moving forward. With that, I will move into the recommendation, but I also know that there is maybe one member of the public that wanted to offer oral testimony. And maybe what I'll do is just go through the recommendation, and if chair, if you're okay with it, then open it up for that person to give their oral testimony.
I think after you give the recommendations, we need to have a motion to approve, and then we can take public comment testimony. Okay, so you can go ahead and present the recommendations.
Okay, I'm wondering if the testimony might impact the voting decision.
Well, we'll vote after we do the testimony.
Yeah,
So you'll go
excuse me,
motion,
excuse me, Dave.
second, recommendations and discussion.
Excuse me, Dave, yes. Usually there's a motion, a second, and then we go into discussion, testimony, and then the council will vote after hearing all of that.
Great, thank you, Chair. I'll move through the recommendation then. So we are recommending that the HISC approve the FY22 budget for HISC support and an interagency project portfolio that is recommended by the HISC support staff with the 2.5% reduction. And then if there's anything that happens with the Department of Budget and Finance, making any changes to the restriction or expenditures, the HISC delegates authority to the HISC support staff to identify best way to apply additional restrictions to project funds or to identify best uses of any released funds. And that if there are any changes in the scope or implementation of projects over the course of the year, the council delegates authority to HISC support staff to make those adjustments to project funds or reassign project funds from any project that does not proceed in a timely manner. So that's just so we don't have to have council meetings if there's any of these small changes that have to happen over the course of getting those budget requests approved.
Okay, thank you, Chelsea. Please forgive my background noise here. Okay, so we have the recommendations. Council members, do I have a motion to approve the recommendations?
Move to approve.
Okay, moved by David Smith. Is there a second to the motion?
Second.
Okay, second by Nicholas Comerford. Thank you. Okay, we are in discussion. Is there any public testimony?
Yes, we have, let me see if they're on here. Oh, great. We We have Lori Buchanan from the Molokai Invasive Species Committee with us.
Aloha, council members. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for always prioritizing invasive species work in Hawaii. Wanted to thank also the HISC staff for always going the extra mile to try and put all of this together, and we're so appreciative. I was going to provide public comments, but maybe yes, because it is budget related on the agenda, the most appropriate time. What I put into the chat was that I wanted to ask the council members, maybe following the approval of this budget for the coming year, that they ask or direct his staff to convene additional meetings before next year's appropriations in order to focus specifically on improving the process. I have been a part of this process, and I don't think I missed any working group budget process for over the last 10 years. And so I can see some room for improvement. And then also being on the receiving side as affected persons through the budget, I think it's really important for us to work together with his staff and others, stakeholders, to improve the project. And that's what I'm hoping the budget can, the council can take up after the approving of this budget for this year, which I'm in favor of, and which we're in favor of. And also thank you again for the good works. Mahalo.
Thank you, Laurie. Is there any other testimony from the public?
I think the only other testimony I had was the one from USDA in support of the mongoose toxicant trials that we are funding this year. And that was included in an earlier email. I won't go through and read that. And then I'll just open it up to our HISC staff who are monitoring YouTube and also any inboxes that might have received late testimony.
There is, this is Elizabeth Spieth, and there is testimony in the YouTube, but it is maybe more appropriate from Christy Martin with CGAPs, maybe more appropriate for at agenda item 5.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. Yeah, we can move that under public comments.
Okay, thank you. Council members, any discussion, any questions, comments? I see Dave Smith's hand raised.
Yeah, I just have one just a comment, and I just want to acknowledge the projects not recommended for funding, and you know, to continue to push for additional funding, because I see a lot of really important things here. I mean, little fire ant, early detection and response on Oahu, effective ways to control koki frogs, impacts of hull biofouling and biofouling and the economic impacts, detector canines, a bunch of different biocontrol projects, which is a real push that we have right now, mongoose control, Verona mites, coffee leaf rust, more little fire ant bullfrogs, which affect endangered species. So a lot of really important stuff there that didn't get funded. And I just want to make note of that, I think to me, it really points out that there's still a need here for funding for some really important work. Thanks.
Okay, anyone else from the council like to discuss the recommendations? I see none. Are we ready to approve the recommendations offered by staff? Okay. All those in favor, raise your hand. I can see you on the screen. Okay, the recommendations are unanimously approved. And we move to public comments.
Thank you, Chair. Elizabeth, do you want to read the public comment, or is that person on the Zoom?
No, the public comment is from Christy Martin with the Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species. And she commented that the $6 million plus a year paid by sea cargo importers into the Department of Agriculture's Pest Inspection and Eradication Fund was used to support nearly half of the 90 PQ inspectors and critical support for Hawaii Ant Lab, HISC, CTAR research, etc. Can the council and legislators meet to discuss if and how funds may be prioritized for this critical invasive species work instead of going directly into the general fund? Thank you.
Okay. Any comments? Other comments? Okay, we're in public comment, so I see Laurie Buchanan's hand raised.
Aloha, and thank you very much. Like I just mentioned a bit earlier, and I put it into the chat, what I would be asking the council to entertain today is to take action and to ask his staff to convene a meeting or meetings, whatever it takes in order to do a review and to look for improvements to the current process by the HISC working group for the budget and budget appropriations. And hopefully that can occur before the next budget cycle. Thank you very much.
Mahalo, Laurie. Council member. I saw Dave Smith's hand raised.
Oh, I just had a question about Christie's comment. Is that those funds going to the general fund and then are they appropriated for that purpose, or you know, is that money used for the purpose of supporting that program?
Okay, can I ask, was it Layla that read the comment from Christy?
That was Elizabeth Spieth.
Oh, okay, Elizabeth. Can she repeat the comment from Christy Martin?
Sure. And what she was talking about was the change. So the $6 million plus a year that is paid by sea cargo importers into the Hawaii Department of Ag's Pest Inspection and Eradication Fund was used to support nearly half of the 90 plant quarantine inspectors and also provided critical support for HAL, BISC, CTAR research, etc. Can the council and legislators meet to discuss if and how funds may be prioritized for this critical invasive species work instead of going directly into the general fund?
Okay.
Thank you. Dave, did you want to continue your question or your comment?
No, we can talk about it offline.
Any other council members have questions regarding that comment? Okay. So I have a procedural question. You know, these comments were offered today. Do we need to have it put it on the agenda for the next meeting?
Yes, I think what Lori mentioned, we could put onto an agenda for the next meeting. And the comment from Christy, I don't think needs to be an agenda item, but maybe we can discuss that offline, Chair, if that is something you would like to have on an agenda for our next council meeting or a future council meeting.
Okay, so do we have an AG here to comment, Deputy AG to comment? Do we just take a motion to put the request by Laurie Buchanan on a future agenda. Do we need to vote on that?
We don't have an AG present. Lori's mentioning that it is on agenda number 4, so the council can take action now on per her request.
Okay, so it's under. Okay, anybody has any further questions regarding the request by Laurie Buchanan to put it on the agenda, future agenda? Yes, Mary Alice.
Regarding the comment in the chat that something could be taken up on agenda item number 4 for this meeting, I believe we've already voted on it. So I don't see how it can be taken up under number 4, but perhaps somebody can correct me if I've missed something.
Yeah, Mary Alice, sorry to jump in, but you are correct. Number 4 is the submittal and requesting approval, which we did take a vote on. What I can say is that HISC staff are willing and think it is a good idea moving forward to convene a meeting with stakeholders and past applicants, especially those recurring applicants, about the funding process and how we can approve it, whether that's doing a virtual meeting like this, or maybe we can meet in person, but we definitely would like to get feedback from those applicants on how we can approve the process for FY23 funding.
So during that opportunity, then the request by Laurie Buchanan can be included in that discussion. Okay. Okay. So then we do not need to approve that. Okay. All right. Is there anything further that we need to discuss? Okay. Okay, I see no council members' hands raised. So Chelsea, is there any further business for this agenda?
Not from HISC staff, and I don't think we had anything further come up through the public comments.
Chelsea, what was, maybe I'm missing something here, but what was this letter from Lindsay Neatman regarding?
That was in support of the mongoose toxicant trials. That was a proposal from USDA Steve Hess. And we provided, I think it was around 18,000.
Okay. So that was part of the existing request and,
yes,
and appropriations. Okay.
Okay, so if there's no further business, do I require a motion to adjourn? Okay, council members, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, I'll take Mary Alice as the person making the motion, and Dave, I'll take you as a second.
Okay.
Okay. Any objections to adjourning this meeting? Raise your hand. I see none. I see smiles. Oh, okay. So thank you very much, staff, for your hard work, providing the various spreadsheets, highlighting the issues, the challenges, and we'll look forward to hearing from you on your outreach discussions with the applicants, and then also our HISC members. Thank you.